She was 5 years old, just 5. And yet that evening my daughter would learn what fear truly was, not from a storm or a nightmare or a scraped knee, but from a grown woman with a gun and a twisted sense of authority. It was supposed to be just another peaceful evening on Elm Ridge, one of those picture-perfect suburban moments that felt almost too quiet, too safe. The kind of neighborhood where people waved from porches, where wind chimes tinkled gently in the breeze, and where every front lawn looked like it had been clipped with scissors. And there, in the middle of all that carefully maintained normalcy, was Lily, my daughter, riding her tricycle with the uncontainable joy only a child could feel. Her laugh, high and clear like a songbird's, echoed off the houses as she spun lazy circles around our driveway. She wore her favorite pink dress with yellow daisies, the one she insisted on wearing even when it clashed with her unicorn helmet. Her curls bobbed as she rode, her cheeks flushed with life. I stood on the porch with a mug of lukewarm coffee in my hand, soaking in the moment, grateful for a rare slice of calm in a world that rarely offered it. And then I saw her, Karen Hawthorne, the HOA president, the woman who treated our little community like her personal kingdom. At first I didn't think much of it. She was always out and about, clipboard in hand, frowning at trash cans left out too long or kids chalking on sidewalks. But something was different this time. Her movements were sharper, more aggressive. Her mouth was twisted in that familiar scowl, but there was something else behind it, something wild. She stalked across her lawn like a storm rolling in. I could already tell she had a new complaint, probably about Lily's tricycle again. A few days earlier, we'd received another one of her absurd violation letters. Obstruction of visual harmony, she had called it. As if a 5-year-old's pink tricycle was some kind of threat to property values. I'd crumpled it up and tossed it in the trash without reading past the second sentence. It wasn't the first, and I doubted it would be the last. Karen had made it her mission to enforce every inch of the HOA handbook like scripture, and to her, we were sinners. Our offense? Letting a little girl play in her own driveway. As she drew closer, I felt that small chill crawl up my spine, the kind you get when you realize something isn't just annoying anymore. It's dangerous. Her eyes locked on Lily, and I recognized something I hadn't seen before. Rage, not irritation, not neighborly concern. Rage, like something had broken loose inside her. She didn't wave, didn't say hello. She just kept walking, a thick envelope clutched in one hand and the other buried in that massive tote bag she always carried. I set my mug down slowly. Something felt off, deeply off. "Karen," I called out, trying to sound casual. "Whatever it is, can we talk about it later? She's just playing." But she didn't even look at me. Her eyes were still on Lily. Her face was pale, but her neck and ears were bright red. She walked right past me, stepping into our driveway without a word, as if my property lines meant nothing. She stopped a few feet from Lily, who had paused mid-ride and looked up with wide, innocent eyes. "This ends now," Karen said, her voice flat and chilling. I took a step forward, feeling my pulse quicken. "Karen, she's 5. This is ridiculous. You've made your point." That's when her hand emerged from the bag, and she was holding a gun. I didn't have time to think. I didn't have time to scream. All I could do was react. I lunged in front of Lily, my arms instinctively spreading out to protect her tiny frame, my heart exploding in my chest. "Are you insane?" I shouted, backing up and shielding Lily with my body. "Put that down. You're scaring her." Karen's hand trembled, but she didn't lower the weapon. "You've defied me for the last time," she hissed. "You let this child disrupt the peace of this neighborhood. You think the rules don't apply to you?" Her eyes were glassy now, almost as if she wasn't really seeing us at all, but some imagined threat built up in her mind over years of pent-up resentment and paranoia. I could hear Lily behind me, her breath hitching in her throat, her voice small and scared. "Daddy, what's happening?" That sound, her voice in that moment, will never leave me. I kept my voice low, steady. "Karen, listen to me. You're making a mistake. No one has broken any laws. She's just a child. You're not thinking clearly." But it was like talking to a wall. She began ranting about respect, about community standards, about how nobody ever listened to her and how she was done being ignored. And then, with terrifying finality, she said, "I've warned you. You brought this on yourself." And she pulled the trigger. The explosion of sound was like a thunderclap tearing the sky in half. I felt the impact immediately. Searing, burning pain tore through my shoulder, but I didn't fall. I turned to Lily. She was no longer standing. She was on the ground, curled up beside her tricycle, one leg bent at an unnatural angle, blood rapidly staining her dress. Her mouth was open, but no sound came out at first. Then a scream, raw and endless, that turned the world inside out. I dropped to my knees, clutching her, my own pain forgotten. All I could see was her blood. All I could hear was her scream. And in that moment, our perfect little neighborhood shattered into pieces that could never be put back together again. The sound of Lily's scream pierced through the calm like a siren, raw, jagged, and full of terror. My hands were shaking uncontrollably as I cradled her fragile body. Her leg, her tiny leg, was soaked in blood. Her unicorn helmet had fallen off, and her golden curls clung to her damp cheeks as tears streamed down her face. "Daddy, it hurts," she whimpered through shallow, gasping breaths. My heart was tearing in half right there on the concrete, and I didn't even feel the fire burning through my own shoulder anymore. The only thing that mattered in that moment was her. I pressed down on the wound with both hands, trying to stem the flow of blood, whispering to her over and over, "You're okay, sweetheart. Daddy's here. Just hold on." But the blood wouldn't stop. It soaked through my fingers, warm and slick, and for a terrifying moment, I thought I was losing her right there in our driveway. Around us, chaos erupted. Doors flew open. Neighbors came running, their faces pale with disbelief. Mrs. Langston dropped the groceries in her arms, oranges rolling across the street as she rushed over screaming. Mr. Rivera stumbled out of his house, already dialing 911 with shaking fingers. I could hear him shouting into the phone, "There's been a shooting. A little girl's been hit. Please, send help. Send everyone." Somewhere nearby, someone else was sobbing. I couldn't tell who. Every sound blurred together behind the pounding rush of adrenaline in my ears. Karen stood a few yards away, completely still. Her arm was frozen mid-air, the gun dangling from her hand like it was no longer part of her. Her eyes were wide, her mouth half open in stunned silence. She looked like someone who'd just woken up from a blackout and found herself standing in the middle of a crime scene. Only she was the crime scene. When her gaze finally dropped to the weapon in her hand, she seemed to realize what she'd done, or at least begin to. I didn't mean," she muttered. But no one was listening. Everyone was either rushing toward us or backing away in horror. Then, suddenly, Karen turned and ran. Like a coward, she dropped the gun on the driveway. It clattered loudly against the concrete and spun in a circle, and she bolted back across the street to her house, disappearing behind her front door, as if slamming it shut could erase what she'd just done. I heard the deadbolts clicking into place. It was almost cartoonish. This woman who'd terrorized the neighborhood with HOA rules now locking herself inside like she could hide from what she had unleashed. I wanted to run after her. I wanted to scream, to bang on her door, to make her look at Lily and see the damage she'd caused. But I couldn't leave my daughter. All I could do was hold her and try to keep her conscious. Sirens roared in the distance, growing louder with each passing second until red and blue lights splashed across every house on the block. Police cruisers screeched to a stop, followed by a fire truck and then an ambulance. Paramedics swarmed in like angels in uniforms, calm and fast-moving despite the horror of the scene. "We've got a juvenile gunshot victim," one of them barked into a radio. "Lower extremity wound, active bleeding, vitals unstable. We need immediate evac." I backed away to let them work, my blood-soaked hands falling to my sides. One of the EMTs looked me over and saw the blood pouring from my shoulder. "You've been hit too," he said, already signaling for help. "It's nothing," I told him. "Help her first, please. She's only 5. They loaded Lily onto a stretcher, carefully bracing her leg and wrapping gauze around the wound. She cried out in pain, and I reached out, gripping her tiny fingers in mine. "Don't leave me, Daddy," she whispered through tears, her voice so faint it nearly broke me all over again. "I won't, baby. I'm right here," I said, climbing into the ambulance beside her as they slammed the doors shut. We sped off toward the hospital, sirens wailing, lights flashing, the world a blur beyond the windows. But all I could see was her, my little girl, pale and trembling, her blood still staining her dress. And all I could think was, how did it come to this? What happened next was a blur of white walls, hospital hallways, and the stench of antiseptic. The emergency room swallowed us whole. Nurses, doctors, gurneys, forms, rapid-fire questions. I was pulled aside to be treated for my shoulder, but I barely heard what anyone was saying. Through and through, the doctor told me, clean exit, no nerve damage. It might as well have been a weather report. My mind was already down the hall, inside that operating room where my baby was being prepped for surgery. 4 hours. That's how long it took. 4 brutal, agonizing hours. My wife arrived just after Lily went under. She'd flown back in a panic, barely holding herself together as we clung to one another in that waiting room. When the surgeon finally came out, his face was serious but not grim. "She's going to be okay," he said. "The bullet fractured her femur, but we stabilized it with a titanium plate and screws. There was no major artery damage. She'll need physical therapy and time, but she'll recover." I collapsed into the nearest chair, overwhelmed by the tide of relief and fury and exhaustion. I wanted to scream, I wanted to cry, but most of all, I just wanted to see her. An hour later, I sat beside her bed, watching her chest rise and fall under the thin blanket. Her leg was wrapped in thick casts and elevated with a sling. There were IV lines in her arm. Monitors beeped rhythmically. She stirred when I held her hand. "Daddy!" she croaked, groggy from the anesthesia. I was scared. I kissed her forehead. "I know, sweetie, but you're safe now. You're going to be okay." I meant it, but I didn't believe it. Because Karen was still out there. Back in the neighborhood, things had escalated even further. Karen had refused to surrender. Locked inside her house, she ignored police orders to come out. A negotiator had been brought in. A SWAT team had surrounded the house, setting up barricades and using a loudspeaker to demand her surrender. She was shouting from inside, according to one officer, ranting about how she was the real victim, how the neighborhood had turned against her, how she'd been pushed too far. "I was defending the rules," she reportedly screamed through the door. "You don't know what they put me through." As if a child bleeding on the pavement was somehow justified because someone left a tricycle out too long. Detective Morales visited me the next morning. He took my full statement, his face a mask of professional calm, but I could see the disgust in his eyes when I described what had happened. "We've had reports about her before," he said. "Threats, harassment, intimidation, but nothing like this." She snapped. I asked if she'd been arrested yet. He nodded. "We finally got her out. She was armed when they breached the house, but she didn't fire. She's in custody now, facing a stack of charges. Attempted murder, assault with a deadly weapon, child endangerment. It's not going away quietly." But what chilled me most wasn't the crime. It was how close we'd all come to pretending Karen was just an overzealous neighbor, just annoying, just dramatic. How many warning signs had we ignored? How many times had we laughed off her behavior or dismissed her as eccentric? And now my daughter had a bullet wound and a steel plate in her leg. And I, along with the rest of the neighborhood, had to face a hard truth. We all saw it coming, and we did nothing. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't stop seeing Lily's face the moment she screamed, the way her little hand clutched her leg, her dress soaked in blood. Night after night, I sat in the dark while she slept fitfully across the hall, her cast propped up on pillows, her eyes flinching every time she heard a car door slam or a neighbor raise their voice. The physical pain in my shoulder was manageable. The real agony lived in the memory, and in the fact that Karen was already out on bail. The same woman who pulled the trigger on a 5-year-old child walked right back into her house after spending a single night in jail. She didn't even have to face the neighborhood. The police had taken her out the back, quietly, like they were escorting a misunderstood librarian and not a woman who had tried to murder a child. Her high-profile attorney, flown in from another county, argued that she was an exemplary citizen who had acted under mental strain, and that jail would pose a disproportionate risk to her well-being. The judge, either convinced or complicit, let her go with an ankle monitor and a court order to stay away from us. But staying away wasn't enough. Not nearly. Not after what she did. Not after what she stole. At first I felt helpless. We all did. But something changed when I started talking to the neighbors, really talking. At the hospital, while Lily underwent therapy, I began reaching out to the people Karen had also harmed. It wasn't hard. Most of them had stories. Some had folders. All of them had resentment. Mr. Patel had been fined 6 times for parking his own work van in his own driveway. Sarah Chin, a single mother with 2 kids, had been threatened with eviction for having a basketball hoop visible from the street. The Garcias had been reported to immigration authorities after a disagreement about paint color, despite being third-generation Americans, and Mrs. Jenkins had been publicly humiliated at an HOA meeting for planting unapproved tulips. Everyone had something. What they didn't have, until now, was someone willing to take the first step toward doing something about it. We began to meet in secret. Late evenings in garages, back patios, basements. We shared violation notices, emails, photos. One neighbor even had a video of Karen yelling at her teenage son for playing music from a Bluetooth speaker on a Saturday afternoon. But the real breakthrough came from someone no one expected, Karen's own brother, Harold. He'd kept quiet during her reign, distancing himself from her madness, but after the shooting, he couldn't ignore it any longer. He showed up at my door one afternoon holding a box. "She kept files," he said. "She tracked everyone, took pictures, paid for background checks. It's all here. You need to see what she's done." Inside that box was a horror show dressed as suburbia. Spreadsheets detailing residents' schedules, what time they left for work, when they walked their dogs, who they had over for dinner. Photographs taken through windows, copies of private correspondences, bank statements, personal notes scribbled in the margins, some underlined in red. She hadn't just wanted control, she wanted domination. We handed the box over to a lawyer, then called an emergency HOA meeting, citing bylaws about removal due to abuse of power. We didn't know what would happen, but we were ready for a fight. The community centre was packed to the rafters. Reporters had caught wind of the story. Word had spread. People who'd once been too afraid to speak now stood tall with evidence in hand. Karen showed up dressed like she was going to court, navy pantsuit, pearls, clutching a leather binder. She sat flanked by her lawyer, her mouth pursed tight like she still thought she'd win. But what happened next was the kind of reckoning that you don't often see in real life. One by one, neighbors stood up and spoke. Mr. Patel read the 6 fines and pointed out the fabricated codes she cited. Sarah Chin played the voicemail where Karen threatened to make her children disappear from the street. The Garcias showed documentation proving Karen had forged anonymous complaints to city inspectors. And when my turn came, I didn't speak with anger. I spoke with truth. I walked to the front, took a breath, and said, "Karen Hawthorne shot my 5-year-old daughter over a tricycle." But that wasn't the beginning. It was the boiling point of years of intimidation and cruelty. Tonight, we're not here to punish her. We're here to stop her. I nodded to Sarah, who played one final recording, a tirade Karen had left on her voicemail, threatening to deal with violators personally, and that she was ready to do what needs to be done. There was no defending it anymore. The vote wasn't close. It was unanimous, except for Karen's own trembling hand that cast the sole no. She was removed permanently from any leadership position and barred from participation in the HOA entirely. But that was just the beginning. With everything we'd gathered, the files, the audio, the surveillance photos, the patterns of harassment, we filed a full civil lawsuit. Emotional distress, harassment, intentional infliction of trauma, assault, attempted murder. The case was airtight. Karen's lawyer tried every trick in the book: diminished capacity, public service record, emotional burnout. But the jury wasn't swayed. Not after seeing photos of Lily's leg post-surgery. Not after hearing the tapes. Not after hearing from the dozen other families who had suffered in silence. The verdict was swift, guilty on all counts. The judge didn't hold back either. 8 years in prison, no parole for the first 5. A disgrace to every principle of community leadership, the judge called her. I agreed. In the civil suit that followed, the jury awarded us $2.3 million in damages. Karen lost her house, her savings, her investments. Everything she had built on fear and manipulation was gone, like sand washed away by the tide. And somehow, it still didn't feel like enough. But something amazing happened after that. The neighborhood started to heal. Sarah Chin was elected as the new HOA president and immediately began dismantling Karen's oppressive rulebook. Kids could leave bikes on driveways, garden gnomes popped up on front lawns. Neighbors who hadn't spoken in years now held block parties. The community garden that Karen had vetoed 3 years in a row was approved, funded, and bloomed within months. And Lily? She healed too. Slowly, but she did. Physical therapy helped her walk again. The limp would always be there. So would the scar. But she laughed again. She played again. And on the 1-year anniversary of the shooting, she asked me if she could ride her tricycle down the block, just once, just for fun. We held a block party that day. Music, barbecue, balloons. The neighbors brought Lily a new helmet, pink, with glittery stars, and she rode up and down the street to cheers and applause. The spot where she had fallen was now a flower bed, carefully planted by neighbors as a tribute. Roses, lilies, and a small sign that simply read, "Let kids be kids." As I stood there watching her ride again, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, peace. Not because the scars were gone, but because we stood up, together, and said enough. Because we took back our homes, our voices, and our dignity. Karen Hawthorne sat 2 hours away in a concrete cell, still writing letters about how she had been betrayed, but no one was reading them. The story she wrote in our neighborhood had ended, and this time we wrote the final chapter.